We'll just talk like this. And
Roger, thanks so much for coming down. I
Pleasure.
really appreciate your time, and I know you're busy. The purpose of me asking you here was to get your reflections on the artwork that you commissioned me to put on the walls here, and let you talk to it since it's going to go away. The new restaurant owner has bought the property and is unfortunately going to cover this up or take it out. So thank you for coming down, and if you could tell us why you started the restaurant in the first place, and then give us a little history, that would be great.
Sure. Well, we're sitting here on a nice Sunday afternoon, John, and here we are in 2013. It was more than 10, 11 years ago that I got the idea that this old Wyatt Earp building, is what it was. We're sitting in an area that was a saloon at one time, that Wyatt Earp had a number of other saloons here that he ran in the late 1880s. So here we are in a building that survived all those years. And I thought what I'd do when we put the restaurant in here and had the idea for a restaurant with good American food and all, is we would cover the walls with the idea that Wyatt Earp was here. That's part of our history to celebrate that. And then the important San Diegans, people who made a difference in my life and the life of San Diego, all the way through in sports and in medicine and in business and in arts, and all those kinds of people that I'd come across in my life and that I looked up to from previous generations. And so they're all kind of up there. Jonas Salk is up there,
Yeah.
because he invented a polio vaccine. My dad had polio. It was very personal to me. So every one of those pictures has that kind of story to me. The astronaut is up there, the entrepreneur is up there. And so this is the kind of thing that I thought we would do. And then I ran across you, and you had all this great talent to do these things, to put these faces up there that came alive on these walls. And so I forget what pittance we paid you, but I know you came out here and did these things.
You did pay me though.
Well, I did. Of course I did, because you came out and did magnificent work here, and there was wave after wave of these things because we get new ideas.
Right.
And then I had the idea of bringing the people in who were still alive that we put up on the walls and have them sign it.
Right.
And that became a big deal here too as well, with a lot of local community kind of feeling to the restaurant, and it was really just a fun aspect of having the restaurant.
And one of the things that, while I was painting the people that you requested to be up there, I related to quite a few of these people myself. For instance, Father Joe.
Sure.
I was at the zoo, working at the zoo at the time, and he approached me and said, "My brothers are coming to town. We're having a family reunion. Could you do these portraits of my family, or character drawing?" And I said, "Sure, I'd love to, Father Joe." And lo and behold, he came down here, and he was one of the people that you wanted to see up on the wall. So there were a couple of other people here who had personal relationships or encounters, and I really enjoyed the whole concept of this. This is great. I wish more people would use our artists in town to emulate this type of restaurant.
Well, absolutely. We have this, in fact, Father Joe, that brings to mind the story of actually when he was here that day to sign his picture. And Father Joe has a diabetes, right, is a problem.
Right, yeah.
But his picture was way up on the top of the
Yeah,
second
we had
panel.
him up on the top.
So he had a ladder, right? So he's climbing this ladder, and he's taking his time getting up there. And so when he gets up there, he looks down, and he goes, "Boy, this is far up." So he wanted to say, as he usually did to people, "God bless," and then write Father Joe.
Right.
Well, instead of a comma after bless, it just says, "God bless Father
Father
Joe,"
Joe.
because he was so hot. So there was those kinds of stories all the time. But lots of people that made a difference in San Diego, from B. Evenson, who helped restore Balboa Park in a previous generation, to all the great stars of the football and baseball world that are here, the stars that came out of Hollywood, and Frank Zappa is here, and some of the musicians are here. So in other words, we tried to just get the most incredibly broad cross-section of people.
I have a story about one of the musicians, Gary Puckett.
Sure.
I was working one night on the wall, and someone was behind me. I'm waiting for comments. Usually I got comments when I was working. And, "Wow, that's pretty good artwork, son." That kind of thing. And my head's getting bigger. And he goes, "That doesn't look like him at all." And I didn't turn around. I just kept working. I said, "Okay, this guy doesn't like it. Oh, it's fine." And he said it again. And then finally I I turned to say, well, here's a brush.
Sure, you do it.
And it was him.
No kidding.
And he cracked up. He thought it was so funny that he got me like that. That was pretty good.
Isn't that great? We have Dr. Seuss up here. We've got just an incredible variety of people, and a surprising number of them as I've come back in. I haven't been in here in a couple of years. Come back in here and look today at the great number of signatures that are here. So I hope in some way some of this can be preserved, if only in today's video.
That's what this is all about. I'm trying to maintain what we did here and keep it for other people to view and say, oh, that's nice. But no one's going to be able to view the originals anymore. So that's what makes it kind of sad but special at the same time.
Sure is.
Yeah.
And I remember we had the Wyatt Earp room, of course, over that, the kind of private dining room. And we had a picture of Wyatt Earp and his wife. And his wife's an interesting story, saloon girl, after the OK Corral, right, and all that.
Right.
He marries this gal, comes out here to San Diego to get out of get away from the bad guys, because they were trying to hunt him down, because he shot those people in the OK Corral.
Right.
And he ends up after here. Baldwin, who had Baldwin Hills is named after up in L.A. and was a big oil man in those days, brought him up to L.A. to help start Hollywood Park, the racetrack, because he had started the racetrack at the county fair in Del Mar. The first guy to race horses on that fairground was Wyatt Earp.
Wow.
And then he was asked to come up to L.A. to help establish Hollywood Park because he was a big gambler and he was a very well-known guy, even at the time. Forget the West. So he was known for these kinds of things, for horses, for gambling, for saloons and all this. So Baldwin had him up there, and then he died up there in the 1920s. And his wife, Josephine, actually wrote a book, and in his last years he helped her to write a book which talked about the OK Corral, the West, the confrontations, the shootouts, and in a way that was then taken by the movies. And in fact, Wyatt Earp helped Tom Mix and some of the early cowboys to talk, act like cowboys. And so he was an advisor to these movies. And then after a while, everything we know about the West, everything we know about, High Noon with, all those famous movies, John Ford with John Wayne out in the desert, everything we know about the West actually was filtered through this book and the experiences that Wyatt Earp had in the last years of his life as a movie advisor.
That sounds like a good book to go find and read.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and there's
interesting.
copies here in the Wyatt Earp Museum here in San Diego, if that's still open. I know there was a guy who was gathering all kinds of Wyatt Earp memorabilia.
He was right down the street here, wasn't he?
Yes.
Because I remember talking to him when I was working on the mural. It was we could talk for hours and hours about the stories he had from the books that were written about the West, and it's awesome. Now, I don't know if this is true. I tell this story, and it might not be true. But people ask me about the Wyatt Earp room, because we did that a little separate. And my concept was, I believe Wyatt Earp played cards in the windows. And when people walked by, they said, oh my God, that's Wyatt Earp. And they would come in and he would play cards with them. Now, I don't know if this part's true or not. And he would cheat them. And they would say, that's okay, I played cards with Wyatt Earp. So I don't know if that's a true story.
I don't know about the cheating, but that is actually true. He would play cards in the window there as part of the draw to bring people in, much like I used to stand in front of the restaurant here at night and get people into the restaurant to eat. But no, I think that he was so well known as a gambler, as a former law enforcement guy. He was very well known. In fact, there's a photograph of him coming around the corner down here in a buckboard, if you know what that is, one horse. And he's really moving because the wheels are blur in the photograph. He's moving around that corner, and apparently he's coming up here because he's late or something to get to his restaurant bar. And of course, upstairs was a house of ill repute, which in those days, was probably pretty much the way all these buildings were down here on Fifth Avenue, and all the way through World War II. In fact, through the Korean War, many of these buildings, the upstairs were, houses of prostitution. And in fact, in a couple of these buildings, I found with some of my friends who were redeveloping them, into fancy places they are today, that in these little rooms they would have a closet. And the closet would have a false door in the back, so the girl would, after the guy was through, she'd go and steal his wallet and duck and go into the next room. So they had these little. You found these little things that were heritages of that era, which started back in the 1880s.
And the back of this building has its own staircase going up in an alley to get out. In fact, that's why I believe this place is haunted, is because one night we went back there while I was painting and I heard this noise, and it was about 2 a.m. We worked late because of the restaurant. we had to wait till it closed. And I went back there, and Steve Butts, the person who was assisting me, was somewhere else. And I looked down the hallway and I seen this figure. A light was coming from the top of the stairs, casting this figure. And I started going, "Who's there?" So I called Steve. I said, "Steve, come, there's somebody here." So we both went out there and we yelled at this person, but he didn't move. So finally we got brave enough to go down the hallway to see who was standing at the top of the stairs. And somebody painted a shadow, just no real line, but just very vaguely on the wall to confirm the fact that I thought this place was haunted.
Oh, that's funny.
Do you have any stories?
And you know, I had never had that kind of experience in this building, but I always thought when I walked into this building that everything about it spoke about San Diego's history. For instance, the brick wall that we exposed over there to one side, the bricks were made in Rose Canyon, where I-5 goes up now, where a Costco is, you know.
Uh-huh.
And when I was a kid, there was still a big tower there from the brick kiln that had the exhaust tower, you know, was still on that property. And the bricks here were made here in San Diego. And you can see they're kind of irregular and they're sort of an amateurish kind of brick, because it was, you know, in the 1860s, 70s, 80s that a lot of these buildings were built. All of them along Fifth Avenue here in that brick. But that's where it came from, it was up in Rose Canyon. So everything about this place kind of spoke to me about the history of San Diego.
Exactly, and they're still standing. It's still standing.
Standing very well.
Yes, exactly.
Because it's been a bank building, it's been a drugstore, it's been probably 100 things since Wyatt Earp left to go to LA and on into immortality, basically. And here we are still with the building with all of this history.